the depth just right so that this thing sits right next to the bottom of the fuel tank, so it's going to draw all the fuel out, okay? These have a hydromat set up with them, which when you come up here later, you can see it's a cool little sock that goes on the bottom of the fuel pump. And we did a video on Paying Shift years ago on PRI when Holley came out with the hydromat. It's insane. If any part of the hydromat, you can get them all different sizes, touches fuel, it will draw that fuel even if the rest of it is in air. Like, it can't suck air, it can only suck fuel. It's the trippiest, craziest thing. We literally had it in a tub. We flipped it up on its edge and only one corner was pulling and it doesn't aerate. It's amazing, right? So anyway, that's a really good part of this. Now, if neither one of those works, you don't want to drop the tank, you've got issues, what have you, then you can use the pump and filter system that goes on the frame rail. But there's a couple of caveats I'm going to tell you with that. So it has a pre-filter and a post-filter. It comes with all of that. It's a very reliable fuel pump. I've used them on a lot of stuff over the years. But one key, and you'll notice it here, this fuel tank is sitting up here, that fuel pump is down there. That fuel pump is below the bottom of this tank. You have to have the fuel pump lower than the fuel. A fuel pump is designed to push fuel, not pull it. And if it has to pull it uphill, it's really hard on the pump. So it's gonna heat up the fuel, it's gonna not be as reliable and durable in the long run. So you really need to make sure you do that install right. You don't wanna put it next to exhaust, you don't wanna get it hot, all those things, right? So again, that is a totally viable option, but it's gonna be louder, it's going to be harder to keep fuel cool, etc., than it is with either of these, right? So again, my first choice, one of these bad boys right here. So I went straight to fuel system. It's actually step 3, but step 2 is your next choice, and that is going to be deciding what your tuning interface is. And when I say tuning, I don't mean you bolt this thing on and you have to do all the tuning. When you bolt this thing on, you're going to decide what interface you want, which is going to either be a 3.5-inch touchscreen you can hold, or you're going to use a Bluetooth module, which somebody stole my phone, but we have a phone that was sitting here. So a Bluetooth module that will work with iPad, whatever an Android pad is, and any Android phone and any iPhone, okay? So iOS and Android devices, you can put gauges on your screen. It's the touch screen to do your tuning. Your tuning meaning your configuration. So if I have a 400 cubic inch small block Chevrolet with a camshaft that's got 225 duration at 50 and 9.5 to 1 compression, and it runs on 89 octane normally, it's going to ask me those questions on the touchscreen, and I'm going to tell it each of those. And when I tell it that, it's then going to put a calibration into the system that will get it to start and run and drive. At that point, it is going to go into what is called closed loop and learn mode. Closed loop is when your O2 sensor reads the exhaust gases and decides whether the mixture is lean or rich. And it's going to adjust in the computer in order to get that air-fuel ratio to be perfect. It's going to do that in real time as you're driving. It's going to look at that and it's going to go, man, I'm always having to add fuel in this portion of the tune, or I'm always having to take it away. So I'm going to just permanently take it away or permanently add it. So it's learning. That's where the term self-learning comes from, right? So it's going to learn exactly your car. We put a tune in it, again, that you set up in the configuration that's going to be close enough that the thing's going to fire up and you can start driving it down the road and it's fun. Now, I will tell you one of the things about that. When you do your configuration, you're driving the car, let's say it had a carburetor on it instead of fuel injection and your jetting was way off, right? And let's say there was some point where you're driving your car at like 35 miles an hour, you tip into it and this thing is blubbering, it's fat, it smokes, right? You're always trying to get out of that spot where it's running crappy. You don't want to do that with the fuel injection. The fuel injection, it can only learn what it needs to do when it's in those spots. So if you're driving your car and you tip into it and it has a little stumble, it'll learn that and it'll clear that up. But it means that if you're driving around town and you're cruising along and it has a little stumble and you drive through it, then The next chance you get to back off and get in that same spot again, do it. Because 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it probably won't exist. You see what I'm saying? It needs to learn, it needs to have a lesson to learn, right? So that's a big key. Now, the cool thing about the interfaces also is that now Sniper 2, unlike Sniper 1, allows you to run a variety of Holley dashes. You can run the big Holley dashes, which are awesome and super sexy and used to only be available for HP and Dominator customers or Terminator X. Now they're available for everybody with Sniper 2 as well, okay? So very, very neat. You can totally configure the layout. And I don't mean like you can click on 3 different options or whatever. I mean, you can put logos in it. You can do all kinds of neat stuff with these dashes, okay? Now, you are still able to go in and make tuning changes in the computer with a Sniper, should you choose to. If you want to hook your laptop up to it and get some fine-tuning little things because you know, ooh, I'd like the trans to do this a little different or that a little different, totally doable. Which brings me to my next cool feature of Sniper 2, and that is transmission control, right? So we have transmission control now for 4-speed GM transmissions with a bunch more coming, okay? So, and I always have people ask me about transmissions. It's 2024, okay? So I need you guys to understand one thing that I hear often. People outside the drag race world and outside the off-road world don't seem to understand. You can put any transmission behind any engine on the planet. That is totally a thing nowadays, right? I can put a GM trans behind a Ford, behind a Mopar, and have been able to do it for years. Most people don't know it, but we've been running power glides behind every engine on the planet forever. Well, you know what? A 700 R4 bolts right up where a power glide is. A 4L60 bolts right up where anywhere a power glide went. The bolt pattern on an LS and every old Chevrolet on the planet is all the same. You can do it. The only thing you might need is an adapter flex plate or a small spacer. It's super easy stuff, no big deal, all right? So keep that in mind. Sometimes the right transmission for your project may not be the same as the engine, right? You may have a Coyote, but in your combo, a 4L80 is the right transmission. Well, we got control for that stuff, right? See what I'm saying? So keep that in mind. So now you know about all the fun stuff out here, but let's talk about some of the practical aspects of this thing. So I talked about the throttle body itself, right? The second element, but the optional element in a Sniper 2 is the distributor and coil, okay? The ignition side of this thing. So let's use my 69 Camaro again as an example, right? So I've got a 400 cubic inch small block in it. It's got an MSD billet ready to run and a Holley 750 on it, right? I decide I'm gonna do Sniper on it. So I'm gonna put my Sniper 2 on. I am not gonna touch the distributor. I'm gonna leave the distributor in it, and I'm only gonna run it on fuel only. So I'm gonna bolt this thing on, I'm gonna do my fuel system, I'm gonna do all that stuff. I'm gonna fire this thing up and I'm gonna go do burnouts in the street, right? And I'm gonna drive around town and have a good time. And I'm gonna go, hey, this thing works and it's awesome. Me and my buddies are gonna go get pizza and beer, and we're gonna go back to the shop, and on Saturday afternoon, after having installed the fuel side on Saturday morning, we're gonna put the distributor and the ignition in. So the reason that I say you do this, if you have an already good running vehicle, is because if I installed the Sniper and the ignition system on a vehicle that was perfectly running before, and then for some reason it doesn't start, I don't know which thing it is. Is it the fuel side? Is it the ignition side, right? Now, obviously we can test those things, right? I can check if there's spark, I can do that. Well, why go through the rigmarole, right? So again, make it run on the fuel side first and then put the distributor in. But it also means that in that example, if you have a great running car with a good MSD ready to run, like I said, where my timing curve's already good, I don't have to put timing control in. Yeah, it's better to have timing control for no load cruise. It's gonna help with mileage and a little bit of those things. It might help with idle smoothness or whatever, but it's definitely not a necessity. So I wouldn't let the cost of the ignition side, which is only a couple of $100, it's not a big deal, but if that was the thing that was gonna keep you from doing the upgrade, don't let it be the thing, right? Just upgrade to that later. you know, ask for Sniper 2 for your birthday and ask for the ignition for Christmas, you know? I mean, we're in the time, right? Anybody else like blown away by the fact that like, you know, the morning after Halloween, there were already Christmas decorations up in my neighborhood? Like, Jesus, dude, we're getting earlier and earlier. Before long, we're going 4th of July to Christmas. I don't know. But anyway, so that's the deal, right? Now, speaking of the ignition system plugs directly in. There are settings that you can change, okay, obviously with regards to the ignition system, rev limiter, all those kinds of things. But it is going to talk directly to the ECU, and it is going to make changes, again, on cold start, on full throttle, on no load cruise. So no load cruise, does everybody know what no load cruise means? Anybody? That's going down the freeway. Well, I shouldn't say that. Anybody live in California or Colorado or anywhere with hills and mountains? No? Okay, yes. God bless you. That's where I'm from. So most of the people in the middle of the country crack me up for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is because everything's so flat. Like what you guys think of as a hill is just not a hill, right? It doesn't add load to the engine. So most of the time your car is under no load cruise conditions, which means you can put a ton of timing in it and pull a ton of fuel out of it. Now you guys don't know this because you're not logging what your new car does, but that's exactly what your new car does, right? So I have a 66 Bel Air station wagon that you guys probably have seen on Fastest Car and all that. That was my late wife's car. That car with 1,000 horsepower pro-charged small block and some spray goes down the road literally at like 15.8 air fuels, okay? 14.2 is considered stoic. That's normal, clean, right? 15.2 is super lean, like where people would go, oh my God, I can't believe it's that lean. Literally, I lean that thing out, and it's got a Dominator because it's all crazier than this, but I lean that thing out until it starts to miss, right? And then you go from the 38 degrees of timing it's got, and you start adding more. So at no load cruise, dude, going across Kansas, that thing will have like 48 degrees of timing, 15.2 air fuels, and it makes it go from, you know, going 12 or 13 miles to gallon to 15. That's pretty cool, right? In a car that runs 9s, right? So it's kind of a fun thing. Now, the ECU here is going to do that for you. It's already going to do that. It's going to improve mileage. But I had a question yesterday from a guy that says, okay, I have a Chevelle. It's got a 750 on it. It's got an MSD distributor. It runs real good. I said, okay. I said, well, what don't you like about it? He goes, the cold starts are kind of a pain, and we talked about that a little bit. He said, but I want it to make more power. And I said, okay. And he says, will it make more power with the Sniper 2? And I said, maybe. And he goes, what do you mean maybe? And I said, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say that you have run your engine on the dyno with the 750 Holley and you have jetted the thing perfect. You've done the dyno tuning to make sure this thing is happy and safe and making maximum power. This isn't going to make any more. But if your carburetor is not working properly, right, or it's sized incorrectly, the jetting's wrong, etc., then yes, this one's going to do it. The advantage over the carburetor is that if you get a brand new Holley 750 and it isn't jetted correctly for your engine out of the box, you have to take it apart and change jets. That's not hard at all, but it's intimidating for some people. So consider this the carburetor that changes the jets for you, right? So that's how that works. One of the other cool things about this, two of my favorite things on this system is, one of them is the CAN module, this CAN hub. That is a new offering. So the CAN hub is an option. You put it in the system, and what it allows is for other CAN-enabled devices. CAN stands for Computer-Aided Network. That is a network where different components in the system talk to each other, okay? So the CAN is what is in your new car and has everything in your brand new car talking to each other, right? So it knows there's a headlight out, it knows whatever, right? It knows that you put the seat in a different place than your wife, right? It's that whole deal. It allows all the memory functions, etc. So pretty cool deal. That's another option. But the biggest option, and one that you are required to choose if you upgrade to the ignition, is over here hidden. And you guys can come look at this in a second so you'll believe me, but This is the Sniper EFI PDM. PDM stands for Power Distribution Module. So there are two reasons to have this thing. Number one, who's like me and owns a car that has wing nuts on the battery terminals with 86.5 battery cables going to all the junk, right? Yeah, the rest of you are liars. I know you do it. So that sucks, right? It's always like, you're like, man, look at how good oh crap, you know? So the beauty of the PDM is that for your fuel injection install, if all you have to do is run one battery ground and one battery positive to the PDM, which is a tiny bit bigger than this. I mean, by a tiny bit, I mean like an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch all the way around. So the PDM, you bring power and ground to it, and then it also makes it so you don't have to read the instructions. I mean, I'm saying that, but you should still read the instructions, because all of the wiring that you need to do is right here on the bottom of this lid. It tells you exactly that number one is fuel pump positive, and that it's a 14 gauge wire and what the color is, right? So it makes the wiring so easy. And so what it means is you mount this PDM on your fender or your firewall or hidden up under on the core support, wherever you want it to be. It is not waterproof, it is weather resistant, okay, as far as the cover and all that. So you want to put it in an area that's not just getting splashed all the time, right? But all of your EFI wiring, which is, you know, a handful of wires, goes to this in some nice looking place through the nice fitted harness, and then all you have is two cables going from that, right? Cleans up the install a lot and makes it much easier for you to trace a problem where you've hooked something to the wrong place, right? Much, much easier. Also requires no terminations. So that's the other big deal, and I don't want to say this like, you know, bagging on anybody, but the number one complaint, sorry as I'm struggling over here to get this on, the number one complaint that people have when they're doing an installation is wiring connections, right? It's also the number one problem. Like, I'm not trying to point fingers at you or me or anybody else, but most of the time when somebody calls and has an issue with their install and they're like, I don't know why it's not running, it's because the connections aren't good, right? Like, you've crimped them incorrectly, you've used vice grips to crimp a wire, like whatever, it just sucks. I mean, if you want recommendations on wiring tools, I will gladly give you some really inexpensive, great tools that you should have, but this doesn't require that, because that wire, all you have to do is cut it to length and strip the end of it, and it pushes under a terminal and has a screw that tightens it down. There's no crimp connectors, which, by the way, are far superior to soldering. If you believe that soldering is still good, stick to printed circuit boards. It is not good in vehicles other than on circuit boards. It's not. The OE doesn't solder wires. No aftermarket, you know, wiring company solders wire. That's not how you do it. You crimp them. Crimping is the right way, okay? So this makes it so you don't have to worry about that, though, all right? It is way more plug and play than it's ever been. The PDM is arguably my favorite thing about the whole system, I gotta tell you. So it works really, really well. It makes it a lot simpler, and it makes it a lot more straightforward. So, are there any questions? There are. So but it is not a smart PDM, okay? It is not a smart PDM. So if you want to get more information on it, and this goes for any of the products here, if you walk around the outside, you'll see the giant, you know, touch screens that are here. You can go on there and you can literally click on Sniper EFI and configure a system right on there and see what the price is. That is just Holley's website. I mean, that's just a big computer. You can go and check it all out, and it's great. If you do a system all in, module, Bluetooth, actually the Bluetooth interface is the cheapest, but let's say you did a 5.5 inch dash, you did ignition, fuel, PDM, you know, fuel system, all the things, you're in like the 25